after 7.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Craig Melvin.
And a good Friday morning to you. We're coming on the air with some breaking news from the Supreme Court. The High Court has just declined to stop a ban of TikTok, now set to take effect on Sunday. TikTok is, of course, one of the most popular social media apps in this country, with some 170 million users in the U.S. alone. But the app is owned by a Chinese company, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have said that it is a national security risk. Today's decision comes after the court heard arguments from TikTok against the law that essentially forces its parent company, ByteDance, to sell its operations here. Situation very fluid right now. Both the outgoing Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration, they've both said that they may try to keep the app going. Joined now by our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. So, Laura, let's just start with what this means, what it doesn't mean, and what happens next.
So, no question, a defeat for TikTok here. Obviously, the ban can go through, but there's a question mark about whether the law is actually going to be enforced, even though it was a bipartisan law passed by Congress, signed by President Biden. It may not actually get enforced. So let's come back to that for a second. First, on the law here, the district court, I should say, actually, the District of Columbia, the circuit court there in D.C., decided to let this ban go through. And today, the Supreme Court saying they got it right. So they are affirming the lower court decision, which means the ban can go through, at least legally, as of Sunday. That's when the law was supposed to go into effect. And so this allows that to happen. They say they're not going to get into the First Amendment implications of it. That was something that TikTok had raised and said they're looking at the national security implications, something that the Justice Department, the FBI, they've raised concerns about, as you mentioned, the Chinese ownership interest here, whether the manipulation of American users' data could happen, whether Americans could be spied on effectively. And because of that reason, the Supreme Court is allowing this ban to go through. Now, however, as we have been reporting for days now, as Savannah and others have been reporting for days, the Biden administration effectively ready to punt this over to the Trump administration. The Trump administration also realizing the popularity of this app, looking for ways to save it. But for the company, if I'm the general counsel, I'm saying as of right now, I have a valid law that the Supreme Court is saying can go through. This ban can go through. And so even though the political winds may change here, Craig, the ban as of right now can go into effect on Sunday.
Based on the arguments that we heard during the case there, and based on what we heard from the justices themselves, are you at all surprised by the High Court's decision?
No, and the timing here really, I think, sort of crystallized the stakes for everybody. The whole point of this law was to sort of prompt a divestiture. They hoped by passing this law by Congress, then the company would actually offload this books, perhaps sell it to someone else. That didn't happen, and so they were sort of in a game of chicken, and really everybody was trying to see which one would sort of do the head fake first, but that has not happened here, and so now it's going to be up to the next administration to decide whether to enforce this or not.
Savannah Sellers has been all over the story from the very beginning. I want to bring you into the conversation now. What have we been hearing from TikTok users, TikTok creators?
Well, they have been quite upset, Craig, as you can imagine, as we've been reporting here. 170 million Americans use this app. They were making a lot of noise, calling representatives. They were moving to other Chinese-owned apps as almost a form of protest to make those other apps go viral, kind of make the point, what are you going to do, play whack-a-mole with these types of apps? But also what we're hearing from TikTok has been really interesting in the wake of that news that NBC broke yesterday, which is what Laura was just referring to. The Biden administration is essentially saying that they will not actually implement this law on Sunday. That was a huge win for TikTok because their biggest concern right now has been that day one implementation, because it was the last day of a President Biden who obviously signed this into law. It was not yet over to President Trump, who has said he wants to save TikTok. The reason that's such a big deal, Craig, is because the way that the law is written, what would have happened on day one, should it have been being implemented, is the service providers to TikTok. So that's a company like, think about Apple. That's where you go into their app store and you download TikTok. That's Oracle. That's the company that's hosting all the data for TikTok. It makes it work. Those companies would have been the ones to face a punishment here. They would have been fined $5,000 per user. 5,000 times 170 million, a lot of money. With the Biden administration effectively saying they're not doing that, There is a good chance here, and I think this may end up being the headline, that TikTok continues operating as normal. They have not confirmed that. We will continue to see what happens throughout the day. The big thing we are now waiting for, and Laura can probably add more to this here, is now what the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, is going to say they're going to do. Those service providers and TikTok will be looking for the Department of Justice to put it in writing their plans to not actually implement this law on Saturday. Also, my sources have confirmed to me we will hear from TikTok today. They will say what this access to this app is going to look like this weekend.
So, Savannah, to be clear, the incoming administration, the Trump administration, indications from those officials are what?
Indications from those officials are they want to save it. The incoming National Security Advisor has been saying we have plans to intervene. Now, there are open questions about what that looks like. For starters, the Trump administration could essentially do what the Biden administration is saying they're going to do on Sunday, but just for a lot longer. Say, hey, we're not going to actually enforce that. They also could try to make a sale happen, which would then satisfy the law and make service providers feel better, certainly.
Laura, we've got about 30 seconds left, and I see that you've been going through the actual decision.
Yeah, I think it sort of just underscores what a challenge this was always to say it was a free speech issue here when the ban didn't actually target the speech. The ban targeted the ownership of TikTok, and I think that was why it was always an uphill battle for the app.
Do we know yet the count, 6-3, or?
It's unanimous here.
Unanimous.
There are some concurrences here that sort of explicate further, but it is a per curiam unsigned opinion.
Savannah, thank you. Laura Jarrett, thank you as well. That concludes this NBC News special report. I'm Craig Melvin. We're going to return most of you to the Today Show.